Universal love sourced from the soil, the sky, our ancestors, and maybe even a higher power. Take a few deep breaths and breathe into that universal love. Thank you. When you're ready, you can bring yourself back to this group, to the screen, to the computer. So, like I said, my name's Naomi Ortiz. And I came to thinking about self care really deeply about 8 years ago. I was watching just a lot of folks in the movement work that I was doing around anti violence work and disability justice and US Mexico border activism just burn out and leave. And so I became really fascinated by this. I like, why is that? Is there something that could help? Is that just inevitable of the way our lives are and the way this work is? So I was like really curious about these questions. And so the first thing I did was I went and I interviewed 35 people formally about self-care and their work in social justice. And in essence, a lot of people were sharing about self-sacrifice as their response to movement work. And that was until they'd hit a hard boundary and then they'd withdraw. So I was left with the question, if we don't have capacity because we're exhausted, then how can we really participate in collective liberation? So this was 8 years ago, and I was just starting, self-care was just starting to be a term that people were using. And we hear about self-care a lot in the media now, but then I was like wondering if this could be just one tool that we could use to build our capacity. When we hear about self-care now, it's oftentimes in terms of like exercise and food, bubble baths with your glass of wine, which is legit. That's real self-care. But for me, I actually ended up collecting all those things I just listed under one of the types of self-care, which was body self-care. So that was just, so there's a lot more to it. And so I wanted to start today with a definition of self-care, which was birthed from these interviews. And I'm gonna tell you now, it's a dense definition. So we're gonna go into it a little bit. So don't worry if you don't pick it up on the first reading. So the definition of self-care is self-care means being aware of ourselves, where we are rooted, aware of what is around us, and evolving from the lessons we learn in order to survive and thrive. So very dense, very nuanced and complex, which of course, as maybe social justice folks, we all love. And let's go into it a little more. So self-care means being aware of ourselves. And so that's really about what we need in a moment, day, where we are rooted, our relationship with the place that we live, aware of what is around us, how we're impacting others and being impacted, and evolving from the lessons we learn in order to survive and thrive. And so that's really about learning through trial and error, which actually was one of my favorite interviews that I did with a 14-year-old who, when I asked her about self-care, she's like, I think you just learn through trial and error. And I was like, that's it. So how does this happen? How is this working now in this time of COVID where like everything has changed? I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and she was saying she's feeling almost frantic because a lot of the normal ways that she had approached her self-care, like going to AA meetings, taking her dogs to the dog park, hanging out with friends, were no longer really available for her to be doing. So self-care means being aware of ourselves. So a lot of us have done a good amount of work to try to figure out what we need and how to meet those needs in our day-to-day. But with COVID, meeting those needs has like really radically altered for a lot of us. And even what we need has shifted. I know I personally have been craving a lot more reassurance And so typically ways that I seek reassurance sometimes are from people, from my friends, but mostly I get that from where I live, which is the desert, the Sonoran Desert. And so that leads me, to looking at the second part of self-care, which is self-care means being aware of ourselves and where we are rooted. So I'm super fortunate to have a vehicle to drive to the desert. But as a disabled person, I'm also dependent on parking lots and roads and accessible bathrooms, which have all been closed. So it's making it very difficult for me to do. So I can go out for maybe a half an hour, but by the time I kind of calm my nervous system down and I get grounded, um, in order to sort of soak up that reassurance, it's very difficult to do in 20 minutes. Like, okay, looking at the clock. So that's been a challenge for me. Self-care means being aware of ourselves, where we are rooted, and aware of what is around us. So all of my coping mechanisms for meeting my needs has either gotten tossed out the window or takes a lot more planning. And the part of self-care about, being aware of ourselves and how we're impacting others and how others are impacting us. I don't know about you, but I've been really feeling the strain of this. A lot of my conversations with my friends and family have been around emotionally processing to figure out how to survive without a job, or not having any alone time anymore. Where ideally self-care is about balance between honoring our needs with our loved ones and with the world that we live in. Because of all these changes, there can be a lack of clarity around what those needs even are on all those levels. So we can feel like we're starting from the beginning or starting all over and figuring out what our needs are right now. And the last part, self-care means being aware of ourselves, where we are rooted, aware of what is around us, and evolving from the lessons we learn in order to survive and thrive. So both my partner and I are disabled. And a couple of weeks ago, I made the declaration that like, okay, I had it, I want to cut my hair, and I needed his help. And so you can't see my body, but I have like one arm that bends and then my wrist doesn't flex. So my partner also has the use of like one hand. And when I was asking his permission to share this story, said, also tell them that I can't cut a straight line to save my life. So, so we're outside in the heat, and I'm trying to cut what I can, and he's holding the mirror. And of course the mirror is like wandering off as I'm like trying to like also see myself to cut. And then I get to the parts where I can't cut and I'm like, okay, I'm trying to verbally tell him, do you see that chunk that's lower than the other chunks of hair? Can you cut that? And he's like pointing to things here. And I'm like, no, not there, to the right. And he's going to the left. And I'm like, no, the other right, So you get the idea. It was, it was 3 hours later, I sort of had my hair cut. And honestly, it was a crip win because we're both disabled. We felt like super proud of ourselves. We're like, yes, it's off my neck. It's a win. But that was a day in, before COVID time, we would have spent that energy cleaning the house or doing other activities that we have to do together in order to function. So learning through trial and error is really like also this process of relearning these newer things or how to do old things in different ways that are taking up more energy and more time. So there's this whole new set of skills, coping mechanisms, and tactics that we're trying to figure out, and it can be exhausting. So I've been sitting with a couple of questions for myself in this time, and I thought I'd share those with you. One question is, how can I surrender to what's happening in this time where I also feel empowered and like I have agency? Now I use the word surrender, which I feel a lot of times people respond to like I'm talking about defeat, like I'm defeated. And that's not the way that I am talking about it. And so I'd actually like to read a little bit from the chapter Eclipse Surrender to give you a sense of how I'm talking about surrender. The wind drifts lazily through the yard. The in-between time of twilight has passed and the stars begin to appear. The sunlight pulls away from the face of the mountain, and Grandmother Moon glides out into view. Sitting here in this yard, wedged between the cacti and the porch, I'm waiting to watch the fourth lunar eclipse of the year. This eclipse is occurring when the moon is positioned closest to the earth. Large and round, she fills the sky, and slowly, the creeping shadow of the earth swallows her light. I am witness to her surrender. And so the chapter continues, and I describe watching her light become fully eclipsed in this shadow. Grandmother Moon sits in the shadowy darkness for what seems like an eternity. No way to predict from where I sit on the ground when the shift back will begin. All I can do is be in the moment, feel these emotions, and witness what is happening. The entire desert holds its breath. Even the wind settles into the cracks between the sand and rocks. The animals do not make a sound. The wind, animals, and I wait. We witness, hoping and believing that her light will come again. In this silence, I contemplate surrender. So from here in the chapter, I really go into identifying and exploring how to recognize within myself when it's appropriate to resist surrender. So I share stories about times when I needed to stick up for myself or engage in activism, and what indicators were happened in my body, so I knew that I needed to resist. And then I move into thinking about when surrendering is appropriate, because there really are things out of my control in life for all of us. So I'm picking up back here where I'm really thinking about the appropriate times to surrender. My thoughts drift. This is an event which is out of her control and obscures her light. There's so much intensity moving into shadow and then back into light. Look at the gentle way she moves through it. Suddenly, the rim of Grandmother Moon brightens brilliant white. In the time of shadowy darkness, I had managed to forget how bright she really is. As her being is being slowly unveiled, I know I'm watching the gentleness of surrender and the beauty of rebirth. I think about the cycles we go through. I am aware of my deep desire to create a routine that is a way to sustain balance in my day-to-day life. Yet as soon as I think this, I realize I'm talking about balance and routine like it's some kind of way to control the cycles in my life. Although there are some predictable patterns, so much happens in life that I cannot predict or control. Self-care isn't about guaranteeing happiness or control. Part of self-care is about survival. Ideally, making it through the day, weaving in small ways to support the body, mind, and heart, so I can know when there is a choice to be made or if I just need to surrender. Being gentle with myself in times of surrender reminds me that I am deserving of gentleness. This reminder feeds my ability to know when to resist, when to know enough is enough, and also when I'm selecting to embrace surrender as a way through. There's a time for surrendering, a time for quiet stillness and waiting. This kind of waiting is not an act of passivity, but an act of courage. Courage gathered up into the self-care lesson of learning how to be gentle with myself. Grandmother Moon sat veiled in darkness, but she burst out reborn when the time was right. When I'm dealing with a life eclipse, an event or situation in my life where the only thing I can do is surrender and wait, self-care takes on a new level of urgency. Finding small ways to be gentle with myself is the way I fuel my courage. When no decision I can make can get me out of the situation, choosing small ways to be gentle with myself keeps me going. If I were gentle with myself, I'd play some music. If I were gentle with myself, I'd give myself a day to just feel depressed and not be responsible. If I were gentle with myself, I'd make a snack to take me with when I go. If I were gentle with myself, I'd breathe and stop pressuring myself to be hypervigilant and always planning. These small actions of gentleness towards myself, especially in times when I am feeling the harshness of life, remind me that gentleness is possible. These small acts surrender make surrendering to what is happening a little more bearable. When I am gentle with myself, my mind reminds me that I have a body that needs to be attended to. In times of crisis where I am consciously being gentle with myself, I am also better prepared for when the shadow shifts away, freeing my light. Not having spent all of my energy on resistance generated by fear, I instead, through small, gentle actions, have used some of my energy on sustaining myself. Gentleness weaves my body, mind, and spirit together so they do not disconnect as the life eclipse passes through. So the other question I've really been sitting with is how my values fit in this time. It's like gentleness can bring in, awesome. I really need to practice that in this time and recognizing where and if I have control in a situation or can respond in some way. But then how do I attend to my values, the things I really care about? So I've been feeling angry and fearful, and I'm not feeling very nimble, or adaptable. And so how do I stay soft? I've been feeling very overwhelmed. And when I feel overwhelmed, I can ping pong back and forth between pushing myself really hard and trying to be perfect, and then swinging to the other extreme of doing nothing and being completely passive. So there's this concept that I discuss in the book that I feel like every parent on the call would probably recognize instantly, or even really every disabled person too, is the concept of good enough. So I'm pulling out a few paragraphs here from a chapter, Chaff in the Wind, to explain how I think about good enough. So at this point in the chapter, I've shared stories based on my experience as a disabled person and having an unpredictable body, but also having values around getting and cooking locally sourced food. My inner perfectionist overrules reality with the belief that this level of planning and cooking is sustainable on a day-to-day basis. For a while, my force of will is strong enough to push through any hard times. However, each time I push through, my limits are slightly violated. When I ignore these limits, it adds up, and I start to get pissed off. Suddenly, 6 p.m. rolls around, and I'm banging the pot down on the stove and chopping with a spiteful vengeance. Eventually, something happens that I can't push through. It's embarrassing to admit that this is a relief. It provides a welcome excuse, a valid justification as to why I can't follow through. It appeases my inner perfectionist. I tell myself I need self-care and make the dramatic switch from giving it my all to giving it nothing. We start eating out, produce goes bad, and I feel both relieved and guilty. A shame cycle starts, which rotates between trying to hold myself accountable and trying to let myself off the hook. When long-term values are mistaken for my authentic short-term needs, it becomes easy to get overwhelmed by guilt. Values are something I practice doing or being in the world, but they in themselves do not make me succeed or fail at being an activist or in self-care. I use the phrase practice my values because that's all I can truly do. If I'm truly trying to practice them, succeeding or failing doesn't make me a good or bad person. Practicing values means trying again and again, but it also means sometimes failing again and again. So I share some stories in the chapter about being in this tension between the actions I want to be taking and the realities which are stopping me from doing it perfectly, and how I deal with guilt. And I continue. One of the hardest things about practicing authentic self-care is constantly navigating that inner conflict between needs and values. It requires me to live in the gap, to live between all or nothing. Living in the gap means making a point to honor needs and practice values, knowing that sometimes they conflict. Being perfect or failing aren't authentic ways to practice self-care. Inside this tension between the absolute right way and an absolute wrong way is a truth I must acknowledge. The truth that good enough can provide much of what I need, even if it's technically imperfect. Authentic self-care means living in the messy middle and not feeling bad about it. So self-care in the time of COVID for me really has been about allowing myself to recognize how hard things are right now for myself and a lot of my loved ones and my community and the world. And intentionally trying to bring gentleness in the best I can and really trying to stay soft in that messy middle place between doing things perfectly and giving up to practice good enough. So I'd like to invite Owolabi to join me, and I want to thank you for joining me to discuss self-care today. What are some of your thoughts on this?
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, great. Thank you so much. It was beautiful. It's been a few years since we've done a program together. But it's been a while, and hearing you speak just reminds me of, it's an honor, but I feel like our approaches complement each other. I feel like we have, hearing you, your poetry, the metaphor, I feel like you have a different approach, but I feel like as it soaks in, I see how it complements, if that makes sense. And as was mentioned, I'm been working on this project, The Wilds Beyond Climate Justice, and it's a global webinar, and there's a group of Detroiters who've been meeting weekly. And one of the things that we're kind of coming to is, as activists, trying to have a balance between the personal, the interpersonal, and the social. Sometimes activists can focus so much on the social, on the social dynamics, what's going on in society. And then with self-care, it may swing all the way to the personal, but the interpersonal is there too. And I think part of that is, you mentioned in terms of burnout, it's okay to be on your personal journey. It's okay to, in your life, as you get older, as your life shifts, it's okay for you to make different decisions, for you to step in, step out, step halfway in, change your relationships to the work that you used to do. And I think that part of what we would like to do is have a vision of quote unquote movement or quote unquote community that is not just in the meetings, so it's not just like, if you can't come to the meeting, then you're not part of this, but if it's a community, then we can all stay connected, you know what I'm saying? Even if it's part of your journey to change your relationship to it, And so I think that going from this, like, you must be active, we must all, be doing the same work together, to, I know you have these values, I know what you stand for, and we're connected, even if the way you have to participate, even if the way you have to show up shifts, we still stay connected, and we know that the connections go deeper. And I think that that's relevant for COVID, because I think that even though there's a lot of messages about reopening and things like that, I think this is a time we're going to need great stamina. This is,
Yes.
The people that I'm talking to, this is just the beginning of something. And I know people have a rush and they want to get back to normal as soon, quote unquote, normal as soon as possible. And, think that this is just a blip of 2 months. But I think that this conversation is so important, because we're going to need stamina for the unexpected,
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but like for me, when I am feeling really stressed out and scared and overwhelmed, my inner sense is often to speed up, like I want to speed up and hurry up and like figure out what I can do or what needs to happen. And it's like, what does it mean for that stamina? Like, what do we need for that stamina? Is it just about slowing down? Like, what else is there to brace that stamina?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think that I've been talking to people and looking at this moment as as a spiritual school
Mm.
for me personally, you know? And I think that this is a time of great transformation, and actually been in a number of conversations who, like yourself, are talking about the urge to try to figure it out, you know, but you called it surrender, you know, people can call it going with the flow. You know, we've talked about in conversations here. I think that a lot of people are learning to go with the flow. And I think that if we're going to be in an uncertain situation for months or even years, you know, I think your brain is going to like short circuit if you think that you're going to like figure out every little step of the way. You know what I'm saying? And then lastly, I think with stamina and with spiritual school, and I think you didn't say the word, but I think you're right on it. Like developing your intuition.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things that I've been talking with people that I've been working with, which is different than figuring things out, you know? Like if your intuition is saying rest, your brain might, you know, your patterns might say, oh, I got to do this, I got to do that. But your intuition might say, don't do nothing, you know? And I think actively developing, you talked about your body tells you when to surrender and when to resist, you know? I would call that intuition, you know? That your intuition is like, all right, do I go or do I stop? You know, is this time to flow or is this time to act in this kind of way? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that actively developing your intuition will, you know what I'm saying, fit within what you're saying, but also work with that stamina. What do you think?
Yeah, I think definitely. And I also think that for me, when I look and think about stamina, I also think about love and like where sources of love are in my life.
Mm,
Those are often to the times I feel the most lonely, when I need intense stamina for a long period of time. And I can oftentimes feel the most isolated. And so it's like how to love what loves me. And so sometimes, I mean, not sometimes, of course, that's some like people, my loved ones, um, you know, but they're going through their own processes and their own things. And so for me, a lot of times that includes place, whether that's just like right outside my door, finding the weeds in the cracks, finding the trees that are around me, the cacti, the birds. I had a bird just fly like past the window. You know, it's like the how to love the things that love me, and really like engaging in that love. Yeah.
uh-huh, uh-huh. And I'll say this may not be limited to men, but I think that this is something that many, from the conversations I've had to work on it personally, and I've had conversations with men about it. Oftentimes, we may put so much dependency on a romantic partnership. And for
Mm.
many men, that may be the only source of intimacy that we get, you know, and we, if I may tell a story, it just came to me. I have a friend, we do different projects together. And this is a story that he told me, and he said it was a friend of his, so who knows. But this friend was sick, you know, had whatever the sickness was. It wasn't the virus, this was before that. And he was on Facebook like, yo, I'm not feeling well, you know. And one of his boys, one of his homies was like, yo, I'm at Tim Hortons, you know, I'll bring you some soup. And first he just ignored it, you know. And
Mm.
then he goes again, you know, hey man, I'm about to, you know, I'm in the line, you know, do you want some soup, you know? And he ignored it again, you know. And then he's like, well, I'm checking out, you know, you want me to bring you something? You know, he's like, you know, in a private measure, like, no, man, I want a woman to bring me something. You know, this was, I guess this was like his game. This was like his thing, you know, but I think that for many of us, we associate intimacy and caring only in that one context, you know? And I think this is a good chance. That's something that I've appreciated certain conversations, certain friendships that have actually developed just in the last month or two, you know, when we check on each other and things like that. And so I just wanted to reiterate, everybody's working on love, but many men have to work on, certain boxes that we put love into and certain frameworks that might limit us. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think that it can be difficult to take the risk to like seek love, like I have a friend, I was talking to him actually about, like my relationship with place, like what's available for us that we can brace ourselves against outside of people. And, I was talking about like, sitting with a tree and just like deeply being in, like here, there's these trees, palo verdes, which are green all the way. All of their bark is green, and they have these bright yellow flowers, and so they're just blooming right now and really beautiful. And sitting there and just like really being in love with this tree. And my friend was like his look was just like, "Are you kidding me? Like, you want me to make love to a tree?" And I'm like, "No, that's not what I'm saying." So, it's like. And I had to really kind of push him and be like, do you think that nature loves you? Do you love, I started first like, do you love nature? Do you love this world around you? And finally he's like, oh yeah, I mean, I do, I appreciate it. And I was like, do you think it loves you back? And he was just really, sitting with that. And I think sort of startled by the question. And I was like, why not? Why can't love, come from things that we don't necessarily identify as being like, okay, I love you and I put that effort in, and you love me, and it's like for sure equal, like I can see it. Why don't we risk on things that we don't quite know maybe if they love us back?
Ooh. Wow. That's powerful. I'm gonna definitely have to sit with that. When you talk about, this is not exactly not a person, but it's something that I've been working with, and it's definitely been a support. Within the Orisha tradition, we do a lot of work with our ancestors, with those who have passed. I just received a message from a teacher on Mother's Day, and part of the source of the message was that, whether your mother is living or not on the earth, she can still be a resource. And so working with our ancestors intentionally, there's definitely grief, but I would say perhaps that grief could be not that it's over, but that it's transforming, And so when a person is no longer walking the earth or no longer physically on the earth, there still is a possibility of a different type of relationship and a different type of support. And so we have altar practices, we have practices to not only remember, but to receive, to receive the love from our ancestors. And I think that, like you're saying, they don't have the same stresses. They don't have the same stress as the people, and they don't have 9 to 5s and, different things like that. So like you're saying about nature, it's a relationship that can be deepened and can be leaned into, and you don't have to be alone. I think that's another thing that you're kind of getting to also. It's like, if you ignore the trees, you ignore the grass, you ignore the clouds, you ignore the sun, you ignore the birds, you're very alone. Same way, if you ignore all the ancestors that are all around you for hundreds and thousands of years, then you'll feel very alone. You know what I mean?
Yes. I think about ancestors kind of like the sky, where it's like, because I think there's this desire, when we think about ancestors, to have these, like, at least for me, and this could be different for other people, so I'm totally owning that. Yeah. But I don't necessarily feel like individual relationships with ancestors, but I feel deep connection to them as sort of like this larger entity. And so thinking about them sort of like the sky, where like they're there, and I like can look at that and I can see it's blue and it's present with me, but at the same time, we know it's just reflected light, right? Like it's there and it's not there. And for me, thinking about ancestors in that way is really helpful, because it's like, of course they're present with me and I can call them and call on that strength, and that's real. But I don't necessarily need to worry about like, okay, did I like, say happy birthday to such and such person, which is very big in my culture, to like be like, did you put this on the altar for your nana's, birthday? And so that takes the pressure off a little bit for me.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
These are like ancestral hacks. I don't know. Don't do anything, but
yeah, sometimes they'll send you a little reminder. You're like, oh, okay, hi, Grandma.
Right. Yeah, that's true too. Well, thank you so much. I feel like we could just talk for so long, and I am really grateful to have this exchange as part of this time. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed hearing your poetry, and it gave me a lot of beautiful reminders and connectors. So yeah, I'm definitely happy to be a part of it.
Awesome. So I'm going to move into, we're talking about, like for me, really sources for comfort. And I'd like to share this letter that I closed the book with that was gifted to me, speaking of ancestors. And then we're going to move into some small groups if you all are interested in that. So, so sit back. This is story time now. I'm going to read you this letter. Get comfortable. Oh, and in this piece, I use a term that I coined called rule bearer, which just means somebody who knows the rules of the game, who creates and knows how to access and navigate systems of power. But here's the letter. This is the gift I'm sharing with you that was shared with me. Dear Mijita, Mijitex, Mijito, we live in a world where there's a raging storm swirling around our bodies all of the time. Wind blowing so hard we can't catch our breath. Rain and hail pelting down, stinging skin. Thunder, there is so much thunder, but no lightning, no way to illuminate, a way to navigate through the darkness. The sandy ground beneath our feet is dissolving away, nothing is steady. Water comes too fast and collects around our bodies, soaking the sand into sticky mud, which sucks our bodies downwards. How can we move? We're cold, wet, and those of us who can are frantically collecting anything and everything to make us feel even an ounce of comfort. We do our best to care for our children, our elders, and others who need support to live, but we are so frightened. We are scared to give away much to those who cannot consistently fend for themselves. We are scared of our neighbors and of the people for whom we can't predict their actions. We become suspicious of each other. We even worry that our closest friends are going to take more than their fair share. In all this fear, we adapt. We function in a storm and try to survive. I wrote this book for you and me. The storm of capitalism, materialism, and militarization affects my body, heart, life, and land to the core. I cannot deny the hail which tears at my skin. I cannot deny how raw I feel as I try to function in this world. Yet, this world isn't the only one we have. So many people, besides you and me, live in multiple worlds. Through a combination of identities, geographic locations, mystic learnings, and many imaginative ways, we learn to survive in the midst of this constant change. Living in multiple worlds is a gift of being able to perceive the many layers in this one world. Like an X-ray machine, we can see the bones which construct the whole. We know there are plants, animals, insects here with us, spirits in the wind, and guidance in the stars. We observe rule bearers, the ones who fail to follow the rules, and everyone in between. We can empathize with their stories. We live in these multiple worlds which exist in this world all of the time. Mijitex, I see you. I see your earnest efforts, your confusion, and your passion. I know you will need time to wander, to understand how the many worlds you inhabit are layered and where they connect. And we need you. You have so many gifts to give. Do not get blown away in this raging storm. ¿Y dónde está tu ombligo? Is the question to answer for our survival. Where's your umbilical cord? Where are you rooted? What are you centered in? How do you draw in nourishment? How does one grow roots in the midst of a storm, you ask? Some of the work is ours, to burrow through the sand, to believe the time and energy we spend growing is worth the discomfort and sacrifice. Some of the work is simply practicing patience. Growing roots takes time and attention. Sometimes our roots can follow the tracks made by small animals that lead the way. Mostly, it requires us to pause, be aware, and do the work to go deeper. The way to sustain our spirits is to know where our roots grow, to grow them deep enough and wide enough, like the saguaro elders that live for hundreds of years. Each saguaro grows intertwined roots out close to the surface for many feet to absorb any moisture which comes. And when the monsoon storms rage with wind and fury, the thick stalk, which holds up homes for birds and arms for fruit, simply sways gently in the wind. In knowing where our roots grow, intending to how and where they spread, we make a commitment to ourselves that we can survive here. I won't lie to you. This storm scares me too. I make my choices carefully and hope for the best. I fail a lot. I find myself wasting time on distractions and numbing out when I get overwhelmed. I'm not sure we can live in this storm and sometimes not waste time and not get overwhelmed. This is part of the nature of the world we live in, and we are gifted with options. Growing our roots is a leap of faith. We must trust ourselves that where our roots wander and how deep they grow is just right. Trust yourself. Self-care is a practice of returning, of remembering, of noticing. I notice much more quickly now when my full awareness is swept into the storm, when my attention is flinging about and I remember to breathe. One deep breath, all the way down into my hips, always makes me feel a little bit better. I remember that the storm is not my only home. I also take shelter in the stars, in the trees, and under the soil. I remember to use the tools I've crafted like a lightning bolt to connect me from above to below ground. I return to my roots. I know where they grow. Mijitax, in your passionate learning, remember to be gentle with yourself. When living in a way where many truths exist at once, it is easy to get overwhelmed by the possibilities and the complexity. Accept all of who you are, because this is the place where you're being the essential truth of your nature. You are precious, and it's up to you to carry this preciousness centered in your heart. I carry mine tenderly, wrapped up in an old piece of cloth my grandmother embroidered with the sun and stars. Sometimes remembering I'm precious takes all the courage I have. Sometimes it'll take all the courage you have too. When in doubt, ask yourself, ¿Y dónde está mi ombligo? Because you and me and all life have the capacity and power to grow and be rooted. Find rootedness. Center yourself in your life. Feel connected to and supported by your essence and all of the unseen helpers, the trees, wind, dirt, sky, grandfather sun, grandmother moon, mountains, ancestors, great spirit. Being rooted gives us permission to have something to root to, not another person or activist community, but to the soil we come from, the ancestors we come from grandmother moon, who is inconsistently there, and the energy from Great Spirit. When we are rooted to place, we are rooted to truth. Be rooted to reality, the present here. Con abrazos, Naomi Ortiz. Which means with hugs, with hugs. So we're gonna move now into breaking out into small groups for about 15 minutes, and then we'll regroup to close with a poem that Olabi will perform. And I'll share the questions, and we're also gonna put them in the chat. So once you've shared your name and gender pronouns, which is like how you like to be referred to when someone's not using your name, and where you're from, you can discuss the questions. One thing that surprised me was, and one thing I'm taking with me from this talk is. Hey, yeah, and Olabi, if you're, you have a piece that you were going to share with us to close things together.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. This piece I wrote a few years ago, and it balances disability justice with self-care. And so I hope that it is enjoyable for all. It's called Day-to-Day Struggle. My body is a temple. It's a day-to-day struggle. Physical and mental, the day-to-day struggle. Energy, lyrically, move a muscle, hustle. Spiritually filling me, day-to-day struggle. I know how it feels to wake up, throwing up, hurling out your guts in a pink plastic tub. In and out of consciousness, drastic is what. PB on the bench press, I ain't holding up. Tuck in your like squirrels in high places. Grab your blue robe on the inside naked. Leaning on your lady like baby Willie. Make it. People think I'm talking about shots at the bar. Fool, I'm talking surgery. Shots and a scar. Rolling to emergency. Rolling out the car. Bring the chair closer, nurse. Hold the door ajar. Slurred with the words. Speech spitting nonsense. Hope the doc can bring a resurrection like calm sense. Classic pulling plastic. I ain't talking about Visa. MasterCard. Asking God. Tubes and trachea. In your arms, legs, even down your ureter. It ain't pickle peppers. People picking from your pita. I know pain more than you know your neighbor. Kanye with the D or Chuck with the flavor of love. Rich, dark red flavor of blood. Scrubbing on the ground like the dames in the club. Pick it up. When survival is your hustle. That's just the way we live the day-to-day struggle. My body is a temple. It's a day-to-day struggle. Physical and mental, day-to-day struggle. Energy, lyrically, move a muscle, hustle. Spiritually filling me, day-to-day struggle. You see me like the man who sits in the tower. It means a lot when you come through for visiting hours. I remember when I couldn't stand, I sit in the shower, practice gong to strengthen my power, get my legs back. I wish I could get them days back. Too many days in the days, taking bikes when the pain is back. At 15, on a machine like a train to tracks. At 16, get a kidney, then I came back to life, zombie Christ, reincarnation. So now I take herbs, exercise, meditation. I'm blessed, but I know the spiritual transformation, miracle that I'm breathing. Virgo is my constellation, herbivore that eats a MC raw for occupation. Come this far by faith. Mississippi, Georgia, Africa, struggle with you, can't struggle for you. Struggle with you. I can't struggle for you. Our body is a temple. It's a day-to-day struggle. Physical and mental. This day-to-day struggle. Energy, lyrically, move a muscle, hustle. Spiritually, filling me. This day-to-day struggle. Thank you for all of you for joining in. We hope that this contributes and helps to bless your day-to-day struggle.
Yay. Thank you, everyone. We will be in touch with a follow-up email. And thank you so much for joining us today. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.